YouTube is filled with video producers and NAS experts praising the virtues of Synology NAS devices for video editors. While Synology makes a good product and we have used them for 15 years in our IT service business, the misinformation, malinformation, and incomplete information about RAID choices for Synology NAS in these videos makes me shake my head. My name is Tim Sutinen from PrivacyProShop.com. I also own an IT service company called Sutinen Computers. My aim is to give you an understanding of which RAID type is best for 2 or more people to edit 4K video off of a Synology NAS simultaneously without frustration, headaches, potential heartache, or suicidal thoughts. If you're using mechanical hard drives in the NAS, the RAID type is the most important decision you have to make when setting up a Synology NAS. As with everything in life, you have to make choices when you choose a RAID type for your NAS. And those choices are redundancy, capacity, speed, and cost. If you want redundancy, capacity, and speed, then it is going to cost you a lot. If you want redundancy and capacity at a low cost, then speed is going to be slow. If you want speed and capacity at a low cost, then you won't have redundancy. You get the gist of it. Let's go over the types of Synology RAID that pertain to most video editors, which are Synology Hybrid RAID, RAID 5, RAID 6, and RAID 10. Synology covers them in their Choose a RAID Type document. It is really good, but requires some reading between the lines to understand what Synology truly means, as their marketing and legal departments have sanitized it a lot from what the tech support guys probably originally wrote. I have the link to Synology's document in the description below. This video is brought to you by PrivacyProShop.com, where you can get truly anonymous Lokinet VPN via Lokinet exit nodes. We also offer truly anonymous email service called NemoMail. If you need to be anonymous on the internet, please check out PrivacyProShop.com. You can pay anonymously with most major cryptocurrencies, and we also accept credit cards. Let's start with Synology Hybrid RAID.
So both the disk stations came set up with the Synology Hybrid RAID system with the 1-disk fault tolerance implemented.
We're using Synology's Hybrid RAID with 2-drive fault tolerance. That means I can lose a total of 2 drives without actually losing any data at all. That's pretty good.
So I basically have 4 10 terabyte drives in here and then 2 14 terabyte drives. And of course I'm using a form of RAID, or actually Synology's version of RAID. They call it Synology Hybrid RAID, SHR.
So, with all these YouTube celebrities using Synology Hybrid RAID, it must be pretty awesome, right? Well, let's read what Synology says about it. Synology Hybrid RAID, SHR, is an automated RAID management system designed to simplify storage management and meet the needs of new users who are unfamiliar with RAID types. SHR can combine different sized drives to create a storage volume with optimized capacity and performance, wasting less drive space and providing a more flexible storage solution. When sufficient drives are included, SHR allows for 1 or 2 disk redundancy, meaning the SHR volume can suffer up to 1 or 2 failed drives without experiencing data loss. Then, my interpretation of what Synology is really saying. Synology Hybrid RAID is for clueless noobs or those who don't care about speed and data safety but strictly want the most capacity out of their drives. You can throw any random hard drive at it, and SHR will make use of every gigabyte of them in a super slow Frankenstein storage pool. If a drive fails in that Franken pool, you might as well start fervently praying that another drive doesn't die while the double triple, or quadruple nested parity is reconstructed from the strangely partitioned drives. If you have drives of identical sizes, then Synology Hybrid RAID is just RAID 5 or RAID 6. So if you want one of those, why wouldn't you explicitly choose one of them? We don't even bother putting Synology Hybrid RAID in the higher end models, as we don't want to support this Frankenstein creation. P.S. Don't be a noob. Pretty much the only use case for Synology Hybrid RAID in video production is when you have a bunch of differing size hard drives at hand and you want to take advantage of the most possible capacity for data that doesn't get accessed very often, like backups. Write speed of the system is at most at the speed of one drive, or worse, because parity information ends up being written multiple times to the same disks over the same write operation if you have differing sizes of drives. Synology Hybrid RAID with dissimilar sizes of hard drives is an extreme example of high capacity at low cost with minimal redundancy and really slow speeds. RAID 5.
So out of all those RAID setups, which one is my personal favorite? Well, I absolutely love using RAID 5. I love having the large storage capacity, knowing that if one of my hard drives fails, at least I know I can rebuild that data. I'm not so worried about two hard drives failing at the same time, because like I've said before, it's pretty rare that happens. Speed and capacity are very important to me, especially as a filmmaker and photographer, which is why I think RAID 5 is the perfect setup for my workflow.
I guess I've now seen it all. Love of RAID 5. I wonder if he also loves drama in his life, as RAID 5 will certainly provide that to him one day. This is what Synology says. RAID 5 provides fault tolerance and increased read performance. A minimum of 3 drives is required. RAID 5 can sustain the loss of a single drive. In the event of a drive failure, data from the failed drive is reconstructed from parity striped across the remaining drives. As a result, both read and write performance is severely impacted while a RAID 5 array is in a degraded state. RAID 5 is ideal when space and cost are more important than performance. What Synology is really saying? First, something very important. One drive can fail and you won't lose data. However, before a new drive is rebuilt from the parity data, your NAS will be unusably slow, and because the surviving drives have to work extra hard, it is possible that another drive might fail and all of the data is lost. And the bigger the drives, the more severe the problem, as the rebuild might take weeks. You should not put spinning hard drives bigger than 2 terabytes in a RAID 5 array in a production environment. Also, you should not use drives from the same brand or at least same batch, as they often have the same flaws and fail close to the same time. RAID 5 offers excellent sequential or streaming read performance. But don't forget that hard drives also write, and that the write performance of RAID 5 is the same as a single drive. Yes, just one drive. RAID 5 is really slow when writing. RAID 5 is crappy, slow, and might die on you, but it's cheap. Don't tell us that we didn't try to warn you, you cheapskate. Don't believe that RAID 5 is really slow in writing? Don't take my word for it. Check out one of the dozens of RAID calculators to see it for yourself. RAID 5 is terrible when it comes to write speeds, provides no speed gain over a single drive, no matter how many drives you throw at it. RAID 5 is an example of low cost, high capacity, poor redundancy, and slow write speeds, and high read speeds. So, if RAID 5 is so horrible, is there any use for it? Yes, there are use cases. For instance, backup. If you only occasionally need to use a file and need large storage for it, hard drives in a RAID 5 is probably fine. Make sure you use different brand drives so they don't all die at the same time. SSD storage pools. SSDs write fast and can rebuild the failed drive quickly, so using RAID 5 is a good choice. However, make sure to use different brands or at least different batches of drives to avoid simultaneous drive deaths. Some Synology models include RAID F1, which is RAID 5 modified to unevenly wear the SSDs so they don't die at the same time. And Synology says RAID F1 is, quote, ideal for an all-flash array, end quote. RAID 6.
Now, a RAID 6 provides 2 disks of failure protection. These 2 disks here will allow you to take 2 bullets. It can take 2 failed drives and still recover the data in a way that RAID 5 can't. Enterprise level business users, surveillance users, these kind of data storage operations and environments will always take advantage of RAID 6, because RAID 6, although you lose 2 drives worth of overall available capacity, that safety net is unparalleled.
Wow, RAID 6 must be awesome when enterprise users always use it because of the unparalleled safety net. This is what Synology says. RAID 6 is similar to RAID 5, except it provides another layer of striping and can sustain 2 drive failures. A minimum of 4 drives is required. The performance of RAID 6 is slower than that of RAID 5 due to this additional fault tolerance. RAID 6 becomes attractive when space and cost are important and sustaining multiple drive failures is required. What Synology is really saying: if you need high sequential read performance and RAID 5 is too scary for you, then RAID 6 is less scary. 2 drives can fail and your data is still intact. The parity calculations are even more complicated, so the rebuild is going to be even slower. But at least there's another drive to fall upon before the entire thing is lost. And during the week or 2 that the rebuild is happening, the RAID 6 array is so slow that it is practically useless. Hopefully you have drives that were not all quality control checked by the same sub-minimum wage guy who had a hangover at the Vietnamese hard drive factory. Your write speeds are still terrible at the speed of 1 drive, but at least they're only slightly worse than RAID 5. Unless you need streaming, you are a cheapskate who is trying to save a little bit of money, but at least you are not as foolish as the guy who went for RAID 5. You really should use RAID 10, but whatever. Enjoy your savings while you suffer, sucker. RAID 6 is an example of relatively low cost, relatively high capacity, relatively high redundancy, slow write speeds, but relatively high read speeds. What RAID 6 is useful for: backup and archival. If you only occasionally need to use a file and need a large storage for it, hard drives in a RAID 6 are just fine. SSD pools. SSDs write fast and can rebuild the failed drive much more quickly than hard drives, so using RAID 6 is a good thing. Read-intensive and streaming workloads. RAID 6 can read pretty fast from the drives and is especially good for streaming large files. So, if you mostly read large files, RAID 6 can shine. RAID 10.
I do not recommend running RAID 10 for pretty much any users. The advantage that it's got for the very fast rebuild time is not an issue for most consumer NASs, because realistically, a RAID 6 array will be fine because you're not using your NAS 100% of the time. You're not the enterprise. And so RAID 10 has a lot of disadvantages because it's got 50% storage capacity, half your drives are used for parity, and you still have a real risk of losing 2 drives in one of the stripes.
Well, this is what Synology says. RAID 10 combines the benefits of RAID 1 and RAID 0. Read and write performance is increased, but only half of the total space is available for data storage. 4 or more drives are required, making the cost relatively high, but the performance is great while providing fault tolerance at the same time. In fact, a RAID 10 can sustain multiple drive failures, provided the failures are not within the same subgroup. RAID 10 is ideal for applications with a high input-output demand, such as database servers. What Synology is really saying, you get excellent data protection and performance, but you have to pony up the cache. Who'da thunk that the best costs more? Dude, RAID 10 is the best for most situations, and if you have several people using the NAS at the same time, RAID 10 is the only way to go. If you run databases or VMs off the NAS, you would be foolish to use anything but RAID 10. When a drive fails, the performance of the system is impacted only minimally before and during the rebuild. Rebuilding RAID 10 is quick because it's a simple copy operation instead of having to recreate the data from parity information. So feel free to use those brand new 24 terabyte drives, especially if you used a different brand drive for the mirror. Let's check the RAID calculator for read and write speed gains with RAID 10. Now we're talking. With 8 drives, we're getting 8 times read speeds and 4 times write speeds when compared to a single drive. So what's RAID 10 useful for? Pretty much everything. You should always default to RAID 10 and only use RAID 5 or 6 in special circumstances. It's really as simple as that. If you need even better redundancy, you can use 3 drives per mirror at high expense, but even better read speeds. The only downside is that Synology doesn't allow adding drives to a RAID 10 pool. The only way to increase the size of the pool is to replace the drives with larger ones. That's a good reason you should probably look at a TrueNAS or any other ZFS system. Increasing RAID 10 capacity is as simple as adding more drives in pairs in ZFS. RAID 10 is an example of high cost, low capacity, good or excellent redundancy, relatively fast write speeds, and fast or very fast read speeds, especially random read speeds. SSD caching.
And so I would really look at having an SSD cache if you can, because I have noticed huge performance increases even with a single user having a SSD cache when scrubbing through Timeline in Final Cut Pro. And that will be exacerbated if you have 3 or 4 editors. You will get so much better performance if they're all scrubbing at the same time, if your NAS can be hosting the files off that SSD cache. And so that's why I would really recommend an SSD cache for video editors especially.
Incredible! SSD speeds for video editing automatically with just a small SSD cache. Wowzer! Let's read what Synology says about that. Important considerations when creating SSD cache. Purpose. SSD cache, also known as flash caching, is a cost-effective way to improve the performance of hard disk drive arrays by storing the most frequently accessed data on SSDs. Read the information below to explore whether you will benefit from adding an SSD cache and which setup is right for your use case. Recommended applications. Unsuitable applications. Let's click on that. Unsuitable applications. SSD cache will not improve performance in scenarios involving sequential access patterns. Performance gains from SSD cache are expected to be minimal if you use your Synology NAS for these applications. File server used to upload, download, or access large files. File server with mostly sequential access. And video streaming or playback. Does Synology really say that SSD cache doesn't help with video editing? Yep. And if you look at the comments on that video, you'll see that people are saying that they don't get any benefit out of the SSD cache either. Video files are simply way too big for caching. If you must have SSD access times, you must have an SSD pool. However, with RAID 10 and 8 to 10 hard drives, you get pretty close to SSD access times as long as you don't let the drives fill past 80% or so, because then they start to get fragmented and data access times plummet. And that's all she wrote. If you're interested in digital privacy, open source tech, LokiNet, Session, and the Oxen Network, please check out some of the other videos on this channel. If you want to share your thoughts on this video, please comment below, or you can contact me anonymously on Session. My Session ONS name is Privacy Pro Shop. Thanks for watching, and have a happy day.